So what is the roadmap to fabulous? The way that I defined my road to fabulous is through personal power. I believe that it's all about personal power. How much power do we have at a personal level? Now, at the very bottom of the spectrum, where we have minimal personal power, we're in fear. And at the top of the spectrum, we're feeling fabulous. So obviously between those stages, there's some other steps that we need to get through first. Right at the bottom, when we're feeling fearful, how much personal power do we have? My belief is that you probably have something like 0 to 20% personal power, and you're feeling quite anxious. And at that level, perhaps you're not feeling as fearful, but you're stuck. You don't know how to get away from where you're currently at. And so the personal power is around that 20 to 40%. You're feeling trapped. At the level up from that point, it could be that you're not feeling stuck, you're not feeling trapped, but you don't seem to be going anywhere either. So you're quite stagnant and you're feeling quite bored with your life. And the personal power there would be around the 40 to 60% mark. But what people don't realize when they come to see me is that there is another level above that. In fact, people who feel fearful and feel depressed and they're operating at that bottom tier, they think that the most they could possibly hope for is to feel satisfied with life. But there is actually more than that. So if we move above that line, move above the line, what we can see is that we can feel satisfied and content with life, and that's about 60 to 80% of personal power. And right at the top, it is possible to feel fabulous and euphoric. That is possible, not for 24/7 and 100% of the time, but we can have many, many fabulous and magical moments in our life. What we need to do is get aligned. We need to go from fearful to empowered, from fragile to confident, and from overwhelm to control. So the first thing I'd like to talk to you about are myths. I really would like to debunk some myths. Now, you need to realize that this is my view of the world. My view of the world as to how I got from fear to fabulous. And the way I did that is that I pretty much eliminated some things that other people believe to be true. And what I'd like to talk to you about is this theory of a chemical imbalance. So, as my role as a clinical hypnotherapist, when I tell people that I specialise in chronic depression, the first thing that people say to me is, well, what about chemical imbalance? What do you do with those people? So what people don't understand is that the chemical imbalance theory is just that. It's just a theory. It's never, ever been proven. The way that I can explain it is that our bodies are chemical factories, and so that everything that we feel is reflected in the chemical activity in our brain, everything. So if we're feeling happy, that's going to be reflected in our brain. If we're feeling sad, that will be reflected in our brain. If we're feeling depressed, again, that's going to be reflected in our brain. But did that activity cause us to feel depressed? That's never, ever been proven. So what we need to understand is that we are in control of the way that we feel, and therefore we are in control of what's happening in our brain. Now, how is this relevant? How is it relevant that I'm debunking this chemical imbalance theory? Basically, it's relevant because it puts you in victim mode. So if you have a label attached to you, I can't feel happy because I've been told by my doctor that I have a chemical imbalance, it means you can't do anything about it. How are you going to get to fabulous when you think that you can't do anything about it? So what I'm saying to you is that it is just a theory, it's not proven, it's not a fact. There's no doubt that there is, it is reflected in our brain when we're feeling depressed, but that doesn't mean that that's causing the depression. The other myth is that you'll be like this forever. I mean, who said that we're going to be like this forever? I've had so many people come to see me where their GPs and their doctors have said, this is what you're going to have forever, you need to take this medication forever. Well, who said? How do they know exactly what's going on in our body? Who can tell us exactly how we can think, feel, and how our cells will react to that? I'll give you an example. For instance, I had a client who had severe asthma, and she was told that she wasn't permitted to do a certain type of exercise, i.e. running for a certain amount of time. Now that's what she was told. That wasn't actually true. What she found was that the more she pushed herself, the more that asthma actually disappeared. The other myth that I would like to debunk is the hereditary myth, that we are depressed because our parents are depressed, because our grandparents are depressed. So I would like to say that there is no depression gene. It has never been discovered. There's no such thing as a depression gene. Sure, people who have parents and grandparents who have depression, they are predisposed to having depression themselves. But why is that? Is that because of the coping mechanisms which they've been taught? Is that because they don't know any other way? Is that because of the strategies that they're aware of? Why is it that, generation after generation, we tend to do the same thing? Is it because we're born like that? Or is it because we've learned something from our environment? I'd like to show you this graph here. A while ago, we invented the smallpox vaccine. Now what you can see is that it was incredibly effective. So that as soon as they started using this vaccine, the incidence of smallpox reduced dramatically to the point where it's almost zero now. What that tells me is that this smallpox vaccine was perfect for smallpox. It actually works. But let's have a look to see what actually has happened over time with antidepressants. What's happened over time with antidepressants is that in the last decade alone, the usage of antidepressants has tripled. The largest growing market for antidepressants are preschoolers. But what's actually happened to depression itself? It's been diagnosed every single year as we go on, every single decade. The diagnosis of depression becomes more and more and more. So what does that tell you? Does that tell you that antidepressants are actually effective against the fight of depression? Or is it perhaps telling you that we're not looking at this the way we need to look at this? But if we have a look at antidepressants, it's a completely different story. What we can see is that even though the use of antidepressants has tripled over the last decade alone, depression itself has increased dramatically. So what this tells us is that perhaps antidepressants are not doing what they're supposed to do. In fact, what most studies have found is that for most people, they are no better than a sugar pill. A large consortium of US, UK and Canadian researchers under the Freedom of Information Act gathered all the studies together for antidepressant use, and what they actually found was that for the most part they don't work. That's exactly it. Sure, they're effective for a tiny percentage of the population, and sure, those people still need to take those antidepressants, but they represent a very tiny amount of the people that actually should be on them. So what I'm actually saying is that there needs to be another way. There is another way apart from medication. We have the resources within ourselves to feel better about ourselves. We just don't know how to utilize them yet. Another myth that I'd like to talk about is that you are your past. Now, although things have happened in your past, that doesn't mean that means right now this is the way that you must behave because you had a traumatic past, because you had terrible experiences happen in your past, because you were treated badly by your mother and your father and your grandparents and so on. It doesn't mean that you need to behave a certain way today. It doesn't mean that, forever you'll be imprisoned in this, feeling of depression because of all the terrible things that have happened to you. Another myth that I would like to talk about is that you are your emotions. People think that because they're feeling angry, that means that they're angry people. Because they're feeling anxious, they're anxious people. Because they're feeling sad, they're sad people. They're not sad people, they're not anxious people, they're not angry people. It's just what they're feeling at that time in their life. That's all it is. So we need to remove the label from the person. The person is in a state of sadness does not mean that that person is sad. Feeling stress is part of life. Who said that we need to feel stress as part of our life? Who said that? And why is that true? We make life whatever it is that we choose to make it. Why is it that we must feel stressed? We must feel that we need to keep running to the next thing, keep doing the next thing. It's our choice as to how we choose to run our life. And of course we have the not enough time myth. And we all know that every single one of us has exactly the same amount of time. There is no difference. I have the same amount of time to the person next to me. And when people say to me, when my clients say to me, I don't have enough time to exercise, I say to them, so does that mean you're perhaps busier than the President of the United States? You know that he does 90 minutes of exercise a day, don't you? And then they think, oh, well, perhaps that is an excuse. So that's just a myth. We all have 24/7. Basically, with time, it's what do you prioritise? You will do whatever you feel is the most important in your life, and that's what you will do, and that's how you will spend your time. So really, when we look at all those myths, what's the truth? The truth is you. You create the traffic jam in your life. So why? Why do you do this? Why do you create this traffic jam where you don't have enough time, where you're feeling stressed, where you're not achieving your goals, where you're hanging on to the past,